Is that you, you troubler of Israel? I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon all people from all over Israel to meet me here on Mount Carmel. And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing.
That girl's kind of pretty, isn't she? I was joking with people. It's like, that's either good. If you know me, that's funny. If you don't know me, that's creepy. So that's my wife. So yeah, I'm very grateful for her to be willing to do that. She's from Brazil, and English is her second language, so she was a little nervous about it. But she did a great job. Kelly's not here. I am not Kelly, if you were wondering. And he is on vacation to go visit his family. His mom basically was like strong-arming him, like, "You're coming and bringing my grandkids to visit me." So Kelly's gone for the next couple weeks visiting them. They drove down. He's actually at the church that he was at previously before he came here. He gets to preach for them this morning. So he's getting to do that. If you want to watch that, I'm sure he'd appreciate the support there. But yeah, that means you guys got to put up with me for the next couple weeks as we continue our series in Elijah. We're looking at the prophet Elijah and his life as he is a prophet for God to the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom. So I wanted to talk about kind of where we've been to begin this, because maybe you're just joining with us in this. What we've seen so far is that the nation of Israel is split into two nations after King Solomon. We have the southern nation of Judah and the northern nation of Israel. And Elijah comes and is a prophet to speak to the northern nation of Israel. And he comes during the time and the reign of a man named Ahab, King Ahab. And Ahab, it says in the Bible in 1 Kings 17 that he's doing even more evil than his predecessors. And one of the big things that he has done, he's married Jezebel, who was a princess of Sidon. And as he brought her to the nation of Israel, he also brought with her gods of Baal and Asherah. And they are the gods of success, of worship, of storms. They are gods that encourage child sacrifice. And so not only are people being led away from Yahweh towards Baal, they're also being led away from the principles and character that God has commanded his people towards the evil nations that surrounded them. Success had been happening in Sidon, so you can understand where Ahab's at. He sees this powerful nation. He marries the princess, and then he's like, well, I want our nation to thrive like your nation, so obviously your gods are better than our God. So he starts to substitute that worship. But he's confronted. Early in his reign, he's confronted by a man named Elijah who God sent to tell Ahab that there's going to be a drought, which is significant because what Baal was supposed to bring was storms, rain, and agricultural success. And so for Elijah to come and tell Ahab, confront him and say, in fact, that's not going to happen. You're bringing about this worship of this foreign god, and you're turning the people away from Yahweh. What's going to happen now is instead of the storms and success that you were expecting, there's going to be drought and famine. And for a few years, not even dew, Elijah tells him, not even dew. It's going to be a very dry period of time. And Ahab's not too happy about it. Neither is Jezebel, so they want to kill Elijah. They already wanted to kill all the prophets, but they definitely want to kill Elijah now because he's opposing them. So he has to run and hide, and he goes to a ravine or a wadi, which would be a very unsafe place if there was rain and storms, because the flash floods happen constantly in those areas. But because there's no rain, he is able to stay there until the water dries out. And then God sends Elijah, as we learned last week, to this Sidonian widow. Not a widow in Israel, not in Judah, not one of the Israelites, but to one of the Sidonians, the people that Jezebel came from, the people that brought about this Baal and Asherah worship. He sends Elijah to a widow from that region, and she is on her last meal with her son, and they plan on dying because the famine is pretty severe and they don't have much money. So they're about to die, and Elijah is sent by God to go and ask her for food to provide for him. And I was thinking about that, and I told the sermon club when we were discussing these sermons, I was like, man, I might, maybe, on a good day, have enough faith to be told by God to be like, hey, go confront the President of the United States. Go confront him. I might, on a good day, be able to stand and say, hey, I don't agree with you, sir. I might be able to do that. I don't know that I have enough faith to go tell a widow on her last meal, hey, can you give that to me? Like that is bold for God to ask Elijah to go, because God didn't tell Elijah, hey, I'm going to provide for you both. No, he says, I'm asking you, go ask her for her last meal. And he does. And then God does provide for them and continues to provide for them throughout the entire period of drought and famine. And in fact, her son, if you read the story, her son actually dies at one point, and Elijah is able to pray over him, and he's returned to life. So that God is providing for this widow from Sidon and providing for Elijah at the same time. And it takes a lot of faith. And what we're seeing in this series is the dichotomy between Baal and Ahab and Yahweh and Elijah. We're seeing the difference between these two groups of people and what's happening in the nation of Israel as they're being conflicted by these two. And today, the story we're looking at is the culmination of that, the climax of this story, and the clash between these two conflicting ideals and worship. Let's pray. God, thank you for this opportunity that you give me to share your word. You know that I deeply enjoy being able to speak on your behalf, and I pray, Lord, that you can meet with us here, that everyone hears from you today. Whatever it is that you want to lay on our hearts, pray, Lord, you speak to us, myself included. We've come here to worship you. We've come here to learn from you. We've come to grow closer to you. So pray, Lord, that you use this time. We give it over to you. It's yours. Speak to us and move in this place today. We love you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so the story that was just read, we're going to back up a little bit so that we can understand a little bit of the context. So I'm going to read from 1 Kings 1 through 4, 1 Kings 18, 1 through 4, and we're going to meet the person of Obadiah. So it says this: after a long time, in the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So after 3 years of famine and drought, Elijah is supposed to go present himself to Ahab, who wants him dead, and then God will send rain. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. So we're met with this person, Obadiah, and I didn't want to just move past him. First of all, when we meet the story and see the story where it picks up before they arrive on Mount Carmel, we understand that we meet this guy, Obadiah. So I think it's important to go back and mention him, mention what he was doing. He works in the palace of Ahab. He's one of his administrators, and he's a devout believer in the Lord. And when Jezebel is going to round up and kill off all the prophets, he takes it upon himself to try to hide as many as he can. And so he hides 100 of them, and he has 2 different caves that he hides them in, 50 in each. That's probably not ideal circumstances for these gentlemen. Just like Elijah was suffering, there was other prophets that were also suffering. He ends up meeting and talking with Elijah, and Obadiah is really concerned about this because he knows that he's already in a precarious position. He's already putting his life on the line to protect these prophets, these people, and now he's meeting Elijah, and this is public enemy number 1. He knows that this means death if he doesn't handle this well, and he doesn't want to turn Elijah in, but he also knows that if he doesn't, this is for sure going to mean his doom. And so he tells Elijah, what are you doing here? What have I done wrong? Like, I love when someone meets you for the first time and they're like, what have I done wrong to have to encounter you? Like, that's what Elijah's going through because of his faithfulness to God and what Obadiah is dealing with because of the position that he's in. But it's all okay because Elijah says, it's all right, Obadiah. I actually want you to turn me in. I want to talk to Ahab. I want to meet him. And so he sets up a meeting, and that's what Isa read, was this story of Elijah and Ahab meeting and talking. And he says to Ahab, hey, assemble all your prophets. Take them to Mount Carmel. And I'll meet you there, and we'll discuss things there. And he meets there, and he sends word to all of Israel. So there's the prophets, the 850 different prophets, the 450 of Baal, the 400 of Asherah, and they all meet on Mount Carmel. And there's also people there, people from the nation, because this is grade A entertainment. Something's going down on Mount Carmel. We're going to go. And so word got out, and so there's maybe the entire nation of Israel is meeting there on Mount Carmel to see what's going to happen to Elijah and how God's going to show up in this way. So they meet there, and Elijah asks a poignant question. He says, how long will you waver? How long are you going to waver between these two options, these two opinions, these two forms of worship, these two gods that are in your place? So you still worship Yahweh, but you're also worshiping Baal. And this is pretty common in this day and age. It's pretty common to worship multiple gods. It's pretty common for them to be like, oh, I can worship this and worship this at the same time. Everybody else is doing it. So we can have a God for this and a God for this, and that's great. We have the Yahweh that saved us. That's awesome. But we also need the Baal who's going to send us storms. He's not doing very good at his job, but he's supposed to. And Elijah's saying, how long are you going to let this go on? How long are you going to continue to try to worship these two things? What Elijah's pointing out is that you can't do both. These are mutually exclusive options. You cannot worship Yahweh and Baal at the same time. Yahweh is a jealous God. And he told them right off the bat when he pulled them out of Egypt, like, I'm going to be your God. I am your God. You shall have no other gods. And so you can't worship me and worship something else because that worship that you'd be giving me is improper. You can't have other gods and be with God. God's a monogamous person. Yahweh is monogamous with his people. He's like, you can't go and have relationships with other gods. But that's what they're trying to do. And he's telling them, you can't do this. Not only is it a matter of you can't worship Yahweh and Baal because they're two different gods, but it's also you can't worship them because they have very different principles and practices. To worship Baal is to do some awful things like child sacrifice. You have to worship, and it's a transactional relationship, and it's not seen as good, and it's very opposed to the way that Yahweh wants his people to be. Also, Baal is all about success and power and seeing affluence come, and Yahweh is not about that. We can see that in the life of Elijah. Yahweh has not come to Elijah and says, hey, I'm going to make you very powerful and profitable. No, Elijah has to spend his whole life on the run. He has to hide. He's being fed by ravens and a poor widow that has no food. Yahweh is not the God of success. He's not bringing about success from the world's standpoint to Elijah. He's bringing about success from his standpoint, which is all about relationship. So Elijah is pointing out you can't worship both of these, and how long are you going to stand between the two? So he comes up with a plan. In verse 22, then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. Now, I don't know if he knew about the 100 that Obadiah had hid away. Maybe he was trying to keep them a secret. But he says, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves. Let them cut it into pieces, put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. They were silent when he asked his last question, but here he sets up a plan where they're going to set up an altar, sacrifice a bull, and then call on their God to bring fire down to burn up the sacrifice. That they won't burn up the sacrifice, but their God will. And it's this awesome opportunity for people to see who the true God is. And he sets up this showdown between the gods and creates the space for Yahweh to reveal himself. And so they agree to it. And they sacrifice a bull and they set it on the altar, and the prophets of Baal go first and they start dancing and chanting. They're shouting to Baal, saying, Baal, come and burn this sacrifice, pleading with him. And for several hours they're doing this until Elijah starts to taunt them. And he's like, maybe he's busy, and he can't hear you. The reception's not good. He starts chiding them, and they get more and more desperate as the day goes on. They start cutting themselves, pleading with Baal to show up. We might look at them and think they're deluded, which, yeah, that's fair. But they are certainly devoted, are they not? They are devoted to this idea. They are devoted to this thing because they've been dancing around all day. It's inconvenient sometimes for us to sacrifice an hour of our week for God. But these people are sacrificing their entire day, cutting themselves, pleading with Baal to show up and burn the sacrifice. All day until evening comes. They have been dancing, shouting, pleading with Baal, but no response. Baal does not show up and burn the sacrifice. So Elijah says, it's my turn. You've had your chance. You've done this all day. We've waited around and nothing's happened. Now it's my turn. So he begins to have the altar of the Lord. It's actually unique to see that he doesn't build an altar. There was already an altar that was there. He has them repair that altar, an altar that was set aside for the Lord already. And he sets 12 stones around it for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he has them sacrifice the bull, and then he has them dig a trench around that. And then he has them pour water. And I thought this was unique. He has them pour water on it. They're in the middle of a drought. This is very, everyone, I wonder if it was drinkable water, people have to be like, really? What the heck? You had all this water? Anyway, so he has them dump water, bunch of we would call them buckets, but jars of water onto the bull, the sacrifice. And then he says, do it again. And then he says, do it again. And maybe it was salt water. They're near enough the ocean. Maybe it was salt water. But he has them dump the water on it until it's completely soaked and the trench that he had dug is completely filled. And then Elijah does this. Verse 36. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, that you are turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell, burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil. It also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. So Elijah simply just prays. It's time for him to sacrifice. The prophets of Baal and Asherah, they danced around and chanted. They did all their cultural practices, and nothing happens. But all Elijah simply does is say, okay, God, I'm here before you. And I've set up this sacrifice. I've set up this opportunity just as you've called me to, for you to reveal yourself. This isn't about Elijah gaining glory, although you notice he's like, hey, let them know that I'm working for you. So because you have to understand, Elijah's put his life on the line. He's revealed himself. He does, if you ever considered this thought, maybe Baal doesn't show up, but what if Yahweh doesn't either? I don't think Elijah gets out of there alive. Elijah's got his life on the line, and he's called God, and he's like, hey, let them know that you're real, but also let them know that I'm working for you. That all the stuff I did was because you called me to. He kind of wants God to defend him a little bit. But he calls God and says, God, reveal yourself to your people. Show them that you are the true God. Show them your power. and God burns up the altar. Some people think that this was like lightning. I think that it doesn't kind of make sense because right after this story, the rain's supposed to come and a cloud forms. So I think it's been very dry, so there's not even been clouds in the sky. I think maybe it could have been like a meteor that came down. There's a small meteor that came and just blew everything up. Either way, whatever you want to see in this moment, fire of some form shows up and burns not only the bull, not just the altar, but everything, the stones and the water. It burns the ground. And everyone begins to fall and worship God and say, oh, the Lord's God. They're reminded, they see the power of God before them. God has won this showdown and revealed himself to the people, and they worship him and say, he is God. And then, after this story, prophets of Baal and Asherah, they're like, oh, dang, I guess your God's real. Our bad for, all the child sacrifice and stuff. And they forgive each other, and they all go about their days, and everyone's happy forever. That's not how this ends. No. In fact, what ends up happening is the prophets of Baal and Asherah want to flee the scene because clearly they have lost this showdown. Their God is not real. Yahweh is real. They have done horrible, despicable things. Not to mention there's been a famine in the land, and I don't know if you caught it, but they've been eating at Jezebel's table. So while everyone's starving and thirsty, they've been fed and watered. And they've been encouraging people to sacrifice their children so that the storms would come, and then all of that turns to be false, not real. So they run, and Elijah tells them to not let them get away, and then they slaughter them down in the ravine below, and they all die. Which I can understand. I can understand that if you're one of those Israelites, this is justice. Justice for the time that they've spent the last few years, where they've been turned away from their God to worship this God because these people kept telling them that he'll bring storms, he'll bring prosperity for the land. All they have to do is do, some worship and some sacrifice. Maybe some of them lost their own children for the sake of bringing about the end of the drought. And then it all turns out to be false, not true. Meanwhile, they've been suffering because of the famine, and these people have been eating and drinking at Jezebel's table. I can understand for them that they're pretty upset. And this moment, the justice of this moment is to destroy them. I'm still not comfortable with it. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, there's still part of me. We live in the day and age where we've worshiped Jesus, and we know that Jesus says to Peter, those who live by the sword die by the sword. So this is not about, we are not called to the same form of justice that Elijah was that day. And I'm still not entirely comfortable with it. It's hard for me to read that stuff and be like, oh yeah, way to go, God. Ooh, it's still hard for me. But this was justice for them. In this moment, in this culture, in this context, it was justice for them to destroy them. And if you're thinking, oh, well, God approves this, I can go and slay all of Yahweh's enemies, all the people that are evil in this land that are promoting something other than God, I get to go destroy them, slaughter them too. Well, I'll tell you what. If you stand before a king and tell them that there's not going to be any rain and there's a drought for 3 years, if you are fed by ravens and then subsequently go to a widow and see food last for a significant amount of time that shouldn't, if you raise that widow's child from the dead, and if you call fire down from heaven, then okay, I will give you have permission then to start thinking that way. But until then, I think we have to think like Jesus has called us to, which is with grace and forgiveness. That's how we approach our enemies, not with a sword. Now, this story represents the power of God. We're seeing on Mount Carmel. I had pictures too. Jacob, can we go back to the pictures? Just because I knew I was going to forget. This is Mount Carmel as it looks today. It's seen in, you read about it in the Song of Solomon. Apparently it was adorned with beautiful flowers, and it looks like a very beautiful place. It's lush. So it was known for that. And can you show the map one? It's up in the northern part, very northern tip, which is why they probably could have got water from the sea. But anyway, it's up there, and that's where this battle is commencing. And this place, this is the place where God is choosing to reveal his power to his people, that they have been caught in between these worlds and in between these gods, these forms of worship, and God has had enough. He's brought drought to show them that Baal has no power. The thing that Baal was supposed to bring, he didn't bring. And then he shows up here on Mount Carmel with everyone as witness and shows them that he does have power. This is showing the strength and power of God. Next week, we're going to look on a different mountain, the subtlety of God. But this week, we're looking at the power of God. So there's three things that I want to point out in this story that we've read today, that we've looked at from Elijah's life. Three aspects that I think our community is supposed to reflect. First of all, you may not have caught it, but in the very beginning, that pretty girl read some stuff. She said that Ahab told Elijah that he is a troubler of Israel. Troubler of Israel. He's saying, you troubler of Israel. We don't really use those kind of phrases, like you troubler of real life, like that's not something we would say. But this is an important phrase, and I'm not positive that Ahab knows what he's quoting, but this same phrase is said about another man named Achan. I preached about him a little over a year ago. He's a guy that was in the Israelite community in Joshua 7 and 8. He is one of the people that participated in a battle, and they were told not to take anything for themselves. They were told to destroy everything, and Achan hoards some of the goods from the battle, and he keeps it for himself. And it's told and taught that he is a troubler of Israel because he brought upon destruction in the Israelite community because he took what he shouldn't have. And in Proverbs 15, it talks about that greed destroys community. It brings about trouble for the people around it. When you have a selfish, self-centered attitude, a greedy attitude where you're trying to take for yourself, just like Achan and just like I believe Ahab in this story reflects, you bring trouble not on just yourself, you bring trouble on everyone around you. I think a lot of the times when we have sin and we hold back from our community, we think it just affects us. But all throughout the Bible, it talks about how this brings trouble not just on you, but also the community that you're a part of. So if we are going to be a community that honors Yahweh and worships God and wants to participate the way God has called us to, if we're going to be the people that God has called us to be, then we can't allow greed to take root. We can't be selfish looking for our own gain and our own good. We have to be looking for the needs of others. We have to be outward focused on the people around us. Because as soon as we start to take for ourselves, thinking that it's only going to affect us, thinking that only we will suffer, you're wrong. The community suffers with you. And we will bear that with you. Now, when I preached this a year ago, I mentioned this, and I wanted to reiterate it today, that I think a lot of us may think, oh yeah, I'm not going to be greedy. I'm not going to take from somebody else. I'm not going to, there's going to be good things in my life I'm willing to bless. And you know what? I've seen that. I've been here almost 6 years, and I've seen this church, this community for a long time, and every time that there's an opportunity for you to be generous, you take it, you seize it, and you give in abundance. This is a generous community that will always give, and I know that. If I say here, there's this need, you show up and you give. Whenever we take for the pantry, the food pantry for real needs, those tickets are gone in seconds because you guys look to give. But I will say this, like I said a little over a year ago, there's a reciprocity in relationship. And while you might be willing to give to help other people in their burden, I think a lot of us aren't always willing to share our burdens with each other. And I think that that's part of what we hold back from our community. We do not want to be vulnerable and honest at times, and we do not want to ask for help. And when we do so, we hold the community back. When we are not willing to share with each other our burdens, then we hold the community back because we are being greedy, holding on to it, and we think it's only affecting me. But you're actually holding the entire community back. So if we don't want to be troublers of real life, if we don't want to be like Achan or Ahab, then we have to be the type of people that are willing to share with each other, not just in our generosity, but also in our burdens and what's troubling us. We have to be honest and vulnerable. The second thing that I think we learn from this, and this is the main point, I think, of this entire narrative between Baal and Yahweh, between Ahab and Elijah, is that we do not worship the God of success. We do not worship the God of success. Baal is the God of success, agricultural success, who brings rain and storms to his people, that brings profit to the nation. That is what they are worshiping. That is what they are sacrificing to. We do not worship that God. That is a transactional worship. And if you think, and I know the temptation is like, oh yeah, I've never prayed to Baal. I've never said, Almighty Baal. Baal just means Lord. That's all the word means. This isn't an issue of semantics or terminology. This is an issue of what type of worship you're doing and the type of community that you're a part of, what you're supporting. If you came here today as a part of your worship to worship God and you want to set aside your time, set aside your money so that he will bless you, you might be worshiping Baal instead. If what you came in was like, oh, okay, I'm part of this transactional relationship where I give what I'm supposed to give to God and he gives back to me what I'm supposed to receive, that's Baal worship. That's not Yahweh worship. And if what you think is supposed to come out of your relationship with God is your success in your career, your success for prosperity in your family and in your life, if that's your focus and you think that's what God is focused on, then you're not worshiping Yahweh. Because look at how faithful Elijah was in this story, and look at how materially unsuccessful he was in his life. I'm not saying that you're going to have to go confront some powerful person and then go hide in a cave somewhere. But you do have to be willing to follow when God is calling you not to material success, not to power or prosperity. Those things in God's kingdom are not signs of success in your relationship with him. Those things are responsibilities that you're supposed to share with others. If you have power, if you have profit, those are responsibilities you're supposed to share with the people around you, not hoard for yourself. And if you're called not to that, like some of us, you're called to a life that's not profitable or influential, you're called to a life that's just faithfully following what God calls you to do, then that's Yahweh worship. You're worshiping Yahweh. You're faithful when you are not successful. And I bring this up because I do know that even within I know that this exists within our community because I know it exists within myself. I know that there are times where I have a relationship with God and where I'm confused about my relationship with God because things that I think should be happening in my life are not. I question how good I am in my relationship with God because I'm not seeing the type of success that I'm supposed to. And I have to be reminded that that's not what Yahweh promised to me. He is not the God of success. If you notice what it says, he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. God is a God of people. That is who he cares about, and that's what his priority is. It's relationship with us. And so everything in God's, Yahweh's focus is to bring us back into relationship. So he's not bringing about rain and success for his nation, Israel. He's actually bringing about drought. Why? Because he's trying to call them back to himself. And the same thing that happens in our life. I think sometimes we get confused on that. We get into the worship, and sometimes it's because we go through periods of success. We're worshiping God, and we experience success, and God's like, yeah, I'm blessing you. Hopefully you use that to bless others, and this is great. And then that success starts to wane or grow stagnant or maybe even decreases, and we're starting to wonder, hey, God, what the heck? You promised me this. And he's like, I didn't promise you that. I promised you me. You have me, and I want you to be dependent on me. That's what Elijah is showing us in his relationship with God, and that is what we have to be. If we want to understand and worship the correct and true God, we have to understand that Yahweh is not the God of success, and these are mutually exclusive. We cannot worship both. We cannot waver like Elijah is calling the people. We can't have a foot in both camps. We have to be completely focused on who Yahweh is. And this isn't just about who we're worshiping, but it's also about how we worship. One of the key aspects of Baal worship and receiving the success was sacrificing their children. And Kelly brought up in the first sermon that this might seem like, oh, of course, we're not going to kill our children. But do we set aside the needs of our kid? Do we set aside the attention that we should give the next generation for our success now? And that's one of the things that I think we also have to wrestle with. One of the key factors of worshiping Yahweh and being in relationship with Yahweh is that we care about the next generation. We are investing in the next generation. It's something I'm very big on. I was a youth pastor for a very long time, and I still basically do a lot of youth pastoring today. I don't know that I'll ever be done with it because I don't know that I ever should. We should care about the next generation. We should invest in the next generation. And if I ask you, hey, can you help me send some kids to camp? You'll all give me a check, I'm sure. But will you give me some of your time? Will you love these kids with me? They need some of your time and your attention as well. The last thing that our community needs that we see in this story is belief, faith in his power. Elijah puts his life on the line to have this showdown because God has called him to, and he believes wholeheartedly that God is going to show up. So much so that he knows that if he doesn't, he's going to die, but he's willing to put himself in this position to create the space for God to show up in powerful ways and reveal himself to his people. And I think that's an important aspect of the relationship we need to have with God too. We need to know that God can show up in powerful ways. We need to believe that. I think we're starting to lose that a little bit. In our scientific age, we want explanations for things. We want to see things that we can wrap our minds around and be tangible, and I think we are losing touch with the faith that God is just unique and powerful and can do whatever he wants. I think we need to remember that. Has anyone seen God show up in a powerful way in your life? You can raise your hand. This is a bold moment. God has shown up in powerful ways, and I've seen it. People that should not exist anymore because their life was on the line, God shows up in powerful ways, unexplainable ways. I've seen many things that God has done, and I believe that we need to believe in that God. God is still a powerful God, and I believe that we have stopped creating that space because we're afraid he's not going to show up. We need to keep believing in a powerful God that will show up. He listens and he responds to us. And the last thing that I see in Elijah's life kind of goes into this. He's not unique and special. Don't put him on a pedestal that Elijah's this some like powerful magnetic person. No, he's just a faithful person. He's no different than you or I. It says that in James. He's just a normal guy. He's just faithful to Yahweh. Don't put Elijah on a pedestal that, oh, that's expected of Elijah, but not of me. But also, don't recognize that Elijah's not calling fire from heaven every single day in his life. He's not saying to God every day, he's not showing off God in all these ways. In fact, most of his life consists of him just waiting for God to call him, faithfully waiting for God to say something. And honestly, that's one of the hardest things to do. Honestly, if God shows up to you, I believe you're ready to call fire from heaven today. But are you waiting? Are you willing to wait for 3 years, waiting for that moment? Elijah has to wait and be faithful. And when God calls, he answers and he responds to God and says, yes, I will do that.